right, before I get to talking on the specific emotion for this video, what I'd like to do is give an overview of a new approach and relationship we can have to our emotions. Firstly, and this is probably the biggest one, is we have to learn to recognize that we create our emotions. I found the number one leading cause of, usually the number one cause of people's misery is the belief that the outside world, and especially other people, make them feel what they feel. If we believe this, what we do is create a sense of powerlessness and helplessness to have control and power in our lives. What we must work on and get to is recognizing that emotions are an energetic expression of our own personal value system. Another huge one is to get out of the mind frame of believing that emotions are good or bad. I constantly heard this, and even from professionals, how they label emotions as negative. But I want you to think about what you do with things that you've decided are negative. You think about it. You try to get rid of it. So the problem inherent in believing that emotions are bad or negative is that it creates a relationship of resistance and avoidance. When we resist and avoid particular aspects of us, specifically our emotions, we are then unable to fully claim our power in relationship to them, and we don't get to reap the benefits of what they tell us about ourselves. The final point is that when we connect to our emotions, we connect to our values. When we do this, it increases our self-understanding, our self-worth, and ultimately our power and control. When we allow ourselves to fully feel our emotions without judging them as good or bad, we allow ourselves first to reclaim that sense of control in our body by discharging that energy. And then afterwards, we're able to connect to the emotion that was in response to the value at hand. And I'll get into more specifics as we go along. Okay, so let's talk anger. Poor, misunderstood, maligned anger. Anger is one of those emotions that I think most people recognize and know about, and that also most people judge as a bad emotion. So as I said in my preamble, there is no such thing as a negative or bad emotion. And in fact, when we start seeing every emotion as valid and useful, we can start really understanding ourselves and figuring ourselves out. To get started, what I want to talk about are the physical aspects of anger. So, a little lesson. The autonomic nervous system. It's a very interesting system that I know just a little bit about, and frankly, the stuff I'm going to tell you now, you can look up online, and I encourage you to do so. In short, the autonomic nervous system is the system that helps us regulate all kinds of aspects of our body. It's broken down into two main parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is very oftentimes described as the fight or flight response system. It's this system that gets us up, mobile, and active. The parasympathetic system is the system that's oftentimes called rest and digest, and it oftentimes looks like just the opposite, and it's that place in which we are relaxed and resting. Now, it's not that simple, because the more I study it, the more I recognize and find out that each component, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, are used in conjunction with each other and used in all aspects of our daily movement and activity. So, in regards to anger, what we want to look at is the sympathetic response. So the sympathetic system gets excited in anger. And basically what that looks like is that respiration and heart rate increases. So practically, blood from the gut gets shunted to the limbs and the face in regards to activating. That's the whole point of the sympathetic response. It's to activate. So with anger, what's going on is we're activating to make something happen. And very oftentimes we'll have a lot of energy in order to make that thing happen. Now we'll get more into it in the mental conceptual, but one big problem is when we don't realize exactly what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and yet our body is flooded with tons of energy and tons of desire to move. A couple more aspects in regards to the autonomic nervous system is that very often people can get in a place where they're chronically stuck in anger. Now that doesn't mean they're angry all the time, of course. That I think would be pretty impossible. But what I mean is that their sympathetic response system is activated more quickly and kind of more impulsively. And what that can look like is people getting very frustrated and irritated very quickly. I think you may have recognized in times of your life when you've had a lot of stress and frustration that the little things, those little things that we talk about in life, get to you more readily. Well, what's going on is the sympathetic response in the body is overactivated. In fact, look up adrenal fatigue or adrenal shutdown. I forget how they talk about it. But what you can find out is you can actually overcharge your body so much and have the sympathetic response charged for so long that your adrenal glands just flat out shut down. Besides that kind of extreme version, what we can have when we're often angry and unable to discharge it in an effective manner is we can have chronic fatigue and most especially tension and tightness in the body that can turn into knots and dis-ease. So if you've ever had a professional massage, which I highly recommend, what you will find is that even if you walk into a massage place feeling pretty good, the trained masseuse will find areas of your body that are tense. Now you may or may not be aware of this tension. Now it's not just anger that we hold in our body, it can be other emotions as well. But anger, recognized is tension and tightness, can help us recognize what we can do to relax and get back to a calm place. All right, so now I want to move on to the mental conceptual. So remember, every emotion has its valid point and reason for being. Now with anger, there are two main reasons that anger comes to be or comes to get energized in our body. The first one is in regards to, let me look at my notes, in regards to being blocked from a goal. So keep in mind that what I'm doing here with all of these emotions is talking about how each emotion, all of the emotions I'll be talking about, is in relation to values. So also the other thing is when I say anger, please hear anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance while I speak about anger. Because with every emotion, you'll have a family of emotions that kind of fit together and are kind of experienced the same way. The only difference might be their duration and their intensity. So back to it. The first part that anger is related to is being blocked from a goal, specifically being blocked from a value. So example, let's say you're home and you're trying to fix something, a vase that broke, your dishwasher, whatever, your lawnmower, and it stops working. In the process of trying to fix it, all of a sudden something breaks, something else breaks, or the thing that you almost fixed falls apart. The glue doesn't hold, you bang your thumb, something happens, and now you're even more pissed. So notice what the goal was, the value. The value was, maybe we could call it efficiency, it could be being able to work with our hands, being able to have the thing that's broken whole and complete. So this anger, this frustration is experienced in our body mind, because we are blocked from having that value in our life. So chronic frustration, chronic irritation, chronic anger is almost always that experience of not knowing or not being able to have access to the value that we're shooting for. Now notice I said two aspects there. One is the not knowing. This part is huge. If we're not even aware of the value that we're shooting for, it's going to misalign our purpose and misalign our direction. The other part of that is if we do know our value and what we're shooting for, what we have to recognize is whether or not it's a valid pursuit, whether it's something measurable and manageable to get to. Okay, the second part of when anger gets experienced in the body is through protection. Now, when we find something dangerous outside of us, our autonomic nervous system excites itself, and we get in that fight or flight response, and the physical body is prepared to move. Now, it can be pretty simple to point out dangers externally from us. A car barreling down at us, a mugger trying to get us, or someone being exceptionally rude and caustic. These things are pretty straightforward and pretty easy to identify. So notice, we see something, we've defined something, we've labeled something as dangerous outside of us, and we start to experience anger. We mobilize in the body, and what we're attempting to do is protect ourselves. And again, this is in relation to value. So what we're doing is we're attempting to protect something that we value. It could simply be our existence, our body, our wanting to stay whole and complete. With something more practical, like someone being rude, it could be our sense of integrity or our sense of patience and calm in the present moment. So in this protection, the anger comes in order to help us. It wants us to be whole and complete. It's not trying to get us out of sorts. Now here's where it gets very interesting, is when there is some aspect inside of us, specifically a thought or another emotion that we've defined as dangerous. When this happens, what we start doing is trying to protect ourselves from ourselves. So, I started with anger in this series because there is something called secondary emotions. Secondary emotions are emotions that we have in response to an original emotion. Anger is the perennial secondary emotion. Very often, and I see this all the time in counseling, someone has come in and we start talking and I find out that over years what they've decided is some emotion, specifically sadness or guilt or anxiety, is dangerous. And they've learned to not have access to that emotion. Now, the original emotion has already been spawned in our body, but not having mental, mindful awareness of it, that energy can get turned into anger. And it's in relation to wanting to get rid of that first emotion. So there's the rub. If we have defined some emotion or a combination of emotions as dangerous, that leads to resistance and avoidance. So very basic aspect of emotional intelligence is getting to where we fully accept and recognize all emotions existing in us and being valid. So with anger protecting ourselves from ourselves, what that does is create an internal cat and mouse in which we're constantly trying to avoid and resist aspects of ourselves that already exist. And that's the bitch of it all, is that we're attempting to create patience, calm, and safety by defining something in us as not safe. So that's where we get really stuck. Okay, so let's put all of this together. There's the aspect of the autonomic nervous system, the fight or flight response, that gets activated in our body that leads us to want to move, to create some sort of action. The second part of that is the conceptual part, in which we're attempting to get a goal and we're being blocked from it, or we're attempting to protect a value. So in the response that we're looking for is something that causes us to be continually in control of our own selves. So here's the big kicker here, and I'll talk more about this. What do you do when you're angry? Well, this may sound exceptionally simplistic, but stop and feel. This is the biggest, hardest thing for people to wrap their heads around, is in order to really get yourself back to a place that you want to be, because most people when they're angry don't want to be angry. It doesn't necessarily feel pleasant. The process then is to stop. Now that doesn't mean you stop internally. What you do is you stop the external movement. Because the problem with the autonomic nervous system activating is that the limbic system, the old triune brain, basically just recognizes something like a saber-toothed tiger being dangerous. I know we weren't humans then, but some dangerous thing outside of us needing to be run away from or killed. The problem is if we're in a business meeting or in a car or sitting next to our loved one and we get angry, we can't treat them like a tiger that needs to be bashed over the head. And all too often, that's exactly what we do. And the reason for this is we have all of this energy in our body and we don't know what to do with it except to unleash it on the next thing or the most available thing in front of us. So what that looks like is we literally physically flail about or fight, or verbally, which happens more often, we say mean things. We lash out with our own anger because underneath it all, we are trying to protect ourselves from whatever it is that's going on. In order to really fully reclaim our sense of self, we have to allow ourselves to be angry and not at the external world. Because really what it comes down to is this big kicker of all of this. We've created the meaning that tells us that that thing is dangerous or wrong or bad. Up until now, the stuff I've talked about in this video is universal. Everyone has an autonomic nervous system. Every person has that excitation happen in the body when they have what we call anger. But the difference is is personally based meaning that then defines what is dangerous. That's what's so interesting. One person's thing that causes them to be angry is another person's thing that does not even exist on their radar. So that's where the mind-body connection really comes into place, is when we're angry and we're lashing out, we are not connected with our mind. We're not connected with that newer part of the brain that tells us what we're attempting to solve or get to or protect in the first place. Now, if we're dodging a car or trying to beat someone up who's beating us up, it's pretty obvious. But I'm talking about those daily experiences in which we get pissed and we have no access to the reason why. So the other aspect I want to talk about here is anger management. I'd be remiss to not mention it in a video about anger. About, arbitrary number, 90% of the people that I work with that come in and say they want to work on anger management, I start to hear all of their conversation about how they have access to anger, know they're angry, and do something to discharge it. Now, they might be discharging it inappropriately, but the thing is they have access to it and they do acknowledge it. In my vernacular, they don't have an anger problem. They might have a behavior problem or an impulse problem, but their connection to an awareness of anger is solid. It's actually quite good. Going back to the secondary emotion component, what's happening is they probably have a sadness problem or a guilt problem or an anxiety problem. Problem here meaning they are not accessing and recognizing that they have some other core emotion going on in them. So rather than connect to that core first emotion, the anger is being spawned and they're lashing out. So that's why I say the number one thing that you can do for yourself when you feel angry is to stop. Now what that looks like practically is to walk away, it's to stop talking, it's in some way, shape, or form to pull your energy back into the body in which the energy started from. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get it out of our body because we don't like the experience. If we reverse the polarities and pull our awareness, just our awareness, back into our body, amazing things happen. And the most amazing thing is when we acknowledge that we're angry, we immediately start feeling calmer. Now, why is that? The anger response is attempting to get something that we think we've lost to protect something that we don't want to lose. When we acknowledge that we're angry, we immediately start recognizing that something internally or externally was off. What it's doing is it's giving us self-awareness and understanding just by saying that we're angry. And then from there, you can do any sort of technique that tends to work for you. There's mindful breathing, there's working on wiggling your toes, there's counting sheep, there's walking away from the situation, and even, and I don't normally say this, go somewhere and scream. You're discharging the energy in an appropriate manner instead of at your boss or your loved one. Now, I'll reserve that last one for extreme situations. Most of the time, it's best to just walk away from the situation and get to a place where you can slow the heart rate down, slow respiration, and then you get back to that calm place. So notice then, the anger doesn't engulf you. You've acknowledged it, you feel the bodily tension in your neck, in your back, in your arms, in your legs, and you're breathing fully and deeply to let that energy out. What you've done is you've honored the experience of that anger. Now here's where the work really happens. Once you're back to a calm place, then you need to ignite the mindfulness of curiosity and inquiry to ask yourself what you are angry about. This is the big kicker here. It's now when you can start investigating what it is you're trying to protect or what it is you're trying to get. Very often we're angry because we don't know what it is we're trying to get in this world. Or we have some irrational belief that says we're supposed to have something that is not in our power to have. One example is to get something from someone that is not theirs to give us. Respect, admiration, validation, acknowledgement. And that's where it gets very, very interesting, is when we've slowed down long enough and started to inquire as to what it is that we're wanting, almost always we find some irrational belief that says we're supposed to have something from someone that is not even theirs to give us. So notice in all of this, we start with this loud, boisterous, almost scary energy that we call anger, that when we really work with it in the way I'm discussing, brings us back to a sense of awareness and understanding about what makes us tick. It helps us understand why we're doing what we're doing. And in this, you can totally see how anger can be exceptionally motivating. Now, very often in the moment that we feel that anger, it's not motivating. It can actually be destructive. And that's why people talk about not wanting to think with their emotion. It's in those times when the energy is too much and we need to learn to tone it down and reclaim our sense of calm. But after that, when we connect to the missing value or the thing that we're attempting to protect, that's what gives us motivation and purpose. Because now all of a sudden we recognize, oh my gosh, I want respect, and I'm trying to get other people to respect me, trying to make people respect me. Or you're depressed and you're trying to get people to validate who you are. Well, goodness, now you know that you can learn to validate yourself. This is a lifelong endeavor now. You've found the missing value, now you can go out and hunt for it, but in a productive, efficient, clean manner, rather than trying to beat people over the head to protect your own sense of self or to take from them what you believe you are owed. You go out and find it for yourself. That's power. That's control. Take care.